Hi, everyone. It's the Catholic CEO, Henry Katarna. Welcome to our Exemplary Catholic Leaders series. Today, my special guest is Silas Mahner. He is the creator of Catholic Founders, and I think you're going to find him interesting. Silas, how are you today?
I am fine as frog hair, Henry. Thanks for having me on the show.
You're very welcome. So let's get right into it because our little audience would be very interested, I think, to hear what the Catholic Founders is all about. So maybe tell us about yourself as an individual. And I know you're a family man, I think, and you also have a little business here. So tell us about yourself, Silas.
Yeah, I'll just give you the quick intro, try to keep it interesting. So, my name is Silas Mahner. Most people, when they meet me, they ask me, "Hey, were you named after the book Silas Marner by chance?" It's just a coincidence, I swear. But I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin, the oldest of eight kids. And I sometimes joke, I kind of grew up a little bit like Jesus, not because I could walk on water, but because my dad's a carpenter. And so ever since I was like 8 years old, earlier I was helping him, but around 8 years old, I started helping him a lot in his cabinet shop. And I think, ever since a young age, I always wanted to be a business owner. I didn't know what exactly that might look like. At first, I thought I would take over his business, but things have worked out slightly differently. And kind of fast forward a little bit, I ended up getting a job in recruitment for about 4 years in New York, where I eventually met my wife, and who's originally from Uganda. It's kind of a crazy story on in itself, but now I'm back in Wisconsin
Mhm.
and running a couple of businesses of my own. Finally started my own thing, and one of those projects is the Catholic Founder, which I'm super super excited about.
Well, that's great. Well, we have certainly things in common because I grew up in a family business as well. I'm the oldest of five, so the oldest son thing is you and I would understand what that's all about.
Yeah.
But, I'm interested to know to hear that you said something about Saint Joseph and your father being a carpenter. Saint Joseph is the patron saint of the Catholic CEO, and we always think of him as having been a general contractor and facing all the issues that the business people that you and I deal with are concerned about. So tell us about the Catholic Founders. What do you do, and what's that all about?
Yeah, so Catholic Founder is currently just a Substack. It's a blog hosted on Substack. And the origin of this idea, I think, came to me around 2019 before I ended up moving to New York. And I was just thinking to myself, I wonder how a company would be run if Jesus was a CEO. And this was before I was familiar with that book, Jesus CEO. I've actually not read it yet, so I shouldn't speak too much to it. But I thought, hey, it might make sense that companies would last longer, they would be run better. And I was just very interested in this idea. Once I moved out to New York, I started this new job. So it kind of went on the back burner. But when I publicly launched my own recruitment firm this May, actually on St. Joseph the Workers' Feast Day, it was the evening, and I had this Catholic founders idea kind of cooking already, and I was gonna launch it soon. And it was the evening, and I said, you know what, I dedicated this kind of privately to this launch of my business to Saint Joseph the Worker, but I didn't do anything actively for him. So I said, I'm just gonna ship it. So I published my first blog on the site, saying, here's what we're doing, here's what our vision for the future is, and what it effectively is I believe Catholic business people have an opportunity to be a really big lever on bringing the world back to God. I think on the macro, we see a lot of people very, in search of purpose and meaning in the world, and they're not finding it in the world, right? They're going to find it in some kind of spiritual thing. A lot of people are finding it outside of the Catholic faith, but I think that, as I can see from evidence of my peers, people who grew up with no faith, they're always curious when we hang out. Why do I make sure I get the time to go to mass on Sunday? I do these things that to them seem inconvenient, but I obviously believe in what we're doing. So they're interested, right? They're looking for something, some sort of meaning. And I think that Catholics using their skills that God gave them can be a thing to do that. So that's what Catholic Founders is trying to do, is help Catholics implement the faith into their businesses, and also help more people start businesses, because I think a lot of people bury their skills effectively, right? God gives us many, many skills, and they're afraid. They're afraid to do things on their own. They sometimes think that you can't pursue success in a kind of a earthly fashion, because it's not what the saints did. At least it's not commonly taught as what the saints did. There's plenty of saints that have examples of that, and we want to build a network for all those people who are building businesses who are Catholic.
It's great. It's what I am curious about in your world, as much as we are finding in the Catholic CEO world. a lot of people, we really got our launch catapulted into a higher level during the pandemic when some people were losing their jobs for conscience reasons, and they came to us and said,
Hmm.
well, what do I do? I need to start a business now because I can't go back to the corporate world. I have to, it's a woke culture. I have to avoid that now. And so they wondered in the Catholic business world, can you be Catholic and run a business? Is profit bad? So what are you finding? What do people, the people that you're dealing with, what do they say about that kind of a question?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of in the current iteration of what Catholic Founders is, a lot of it's my just conversations with friends and people that I know in the space. No, not too many interviews at the moment, but what it comes down to, and at the brass tacks, if I could try to summarize it, is business is never it's an opportunity for employment of people, and that is kind of part of the human experience. Ever since the fall of man, we're meant to work. So there needs to be work, but work can't be constantly pulling us away from our faith and our family. And in that means, I think that you can look at entrepreneurship how many people do, which is, hey, this is an opportunity for me to make a lot of money, live some kind of lavish lifestyle. But I don't really see it that way. I think that one of the pieces I wrote was kind of the founder takes all fallacy is what I called it. And I believe that if we are called to start a business, and I could share my story, but I felt that this was my calling, and God kind of kicked me off the ledge and said, "Hey, it's time to go." And it's been going so good so far. I can't take credit for all of that, right? I think God gave me these skills. He gave me all the learning and things up leading up to it, and He's telling me to do this. So if He's leading me down this path, and I have to trust in Him, if I succeed because of many people would call it luck, but obviously we believe it to be providence, then why should I be the one who gets to take all the money and use it for myself? Why do I need private jets? At the end of the day, I only need so much money for my family. Even if I have a huge family, God willing, someday, I don't need all that money in the world. So I can use that as an opportunity to provide employment, which is a opportunity for other people, give them employment opportunities, give them a good work culture, a place that respects their faith, allows them to ideally go to mass on a daily basis, all of these things. And it can actually elevate many families. And the extra money can go to rebuild churches or build schools, things like that, to rebuild
Yeah.
the physical part of the church in the earth.
Yeah, this is great. The concept that comes to my mind sometimes is the Catholic economy. We can be Catholic and successful in business. We can buy from each other, sell from each other, buy with each other, sell to each other. Maybe even capitalize our businesses together, advise each other, and that sort of thing. And we can create an economy that is powerful, and therefore we can influence the culture. So, what are you seeing out there with the businesses that you're interacting with? Are people actually thinking this way, or are they what are their actually the directions they're heading?
I think that a lot of people are thinking more so in the vein of this kind of, how do you say, like a bifurcated version of the, like you said, the Catholic economy, where we do commerce with each other but not with other people. And I think that that's there's some benefits to that, and I think that that's kind of an aspect of what I want to do, is invest in each other's businesses, help build each other up. But at the end of the day, many businesses are publicly facing. And that's the key right here. The key is, where can you interact with employees who may not be Catholic, or interact with your customers who are probably in many cases not Catholic, but how can you influence them without doing it in like a kind of trying to smack it over their head kind of way, right? A very positive and soft way. And I think many people are looking to build this parallel economy, which I'm not in favor of. I think it's important to do some level of preservation and working together. But at the end of the day, this is not an exclusive club, right? Catholicism is for everyone. And if we want to truly be stewards of what Jesus is teaching us, we must be open to sharing the truth with everybody.
Yeah, yeah. The Catholic economy, while it's good, cannot be a silo that isolates us from the world because we have to be out into the world, and we're in the world but not
Yeah.
of it.
I think for example, one of the things I've thought about often is, imagine if people like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos were very, very devout Catholics. Can you imagine the different type of world we would have? The
Yeah,
example they would set, the way their technology would be used intentionally for good rather than more of a neutral thing. I
yeah,
just think it's very hard to imagine the world not being better, right? And obviously, no human's perfect, but if they were devout Catholics, I think that would set a very different kind of precedent and example for everyone.
Yeah, I agree 100%. What do you think then, Silas, would be, if you're a Catholic and you're sort of engaging, you mentioned a few minutes ago, hanging out with your friends they can see that you're Catholic. They can understand you're trying to do things to live the Catholic faith, and you're not letting it compromise your life. You're working the Catholic faith into your life. How would a Catholic run business that engages with the wider world out there, how would it be different? What would it look like, or what could it do differently so that people know that it's being run by Catholics, let's say, even if it's a Catholic business that some businesses are selling, Catholic products, for example, but many are just owned by Catholics and they're dealing with the wider world. What would it look like? Does a Catholic business actually look and feel different than another one?
I think it most certainly feels and looks differently. What I would say though is, let's take the example of a Catholic run, but not explicitly Catholic business.
Yes.
For example, on a holy day of obligation, I like to use the example of a coffee shop for some reason. It's just a simple business, right? You turn up and there's kind of one of two things that I always envision with this scenario is one, the coffee shop's closed. And you're like, okay, why is it closed on a Wednesday or whatever? And there's a sign on the door that says, hey, this is why we're closed today. It's a holy day of obligation. And maybe even gives them, explains what a holy day of obligation is, QR code or something to explain a bit about the day. Or perhaps they're actually open and they're giving away free coffee and kind of offering some explanation as to why. And it gets people interested and curious about it, right? That's an example, right, of interacting with the world. But kind of behind the scenes, you would expect a Catholic business to be run differently in the way it treats its employees. I
Yes.
think, first of all, this isn't not a very popular opinion today, but in the way you pay your employees, right? You should pay them what they need for their family, not based on just what the market is paying, because this is the whole mentality of let's get as cheap of workers as we can and take the arbitrage as the founder and take the most of it for ourselves. If you have a successful business that's producing a healthy return, you should be sharing it with your employees to a large extent, right? So I think that's one. The types of benefits you would provide, the work culture itself should be one where we deal with each person individually. I think it's very easy to focus on equitable workplace practices, which mean equal treatment, not necessarily the best treatment for all, but hey, we can't do this for you because we didn't do it for the other person, and it wouldn't be fair. But I don't believe that that's actually a high power culture, because really you're just trying to regulate a a good place to work. Whereas if you can teach each other how to deal with one person and have charity towards the other based off of their circumstances, you start to develop more of an understanding and a kind of a feel for each other. Somebody wants to go take half the day off because their kids have got a baseball game or something. The other employees might say, "Oh, well, I need that too." But if you say, "Well, do you have a kid in that situation?" No, you don't. But maybe someday you'll have something else, and they're not going to ask for that because they got it. So it's a bit of a trading. And I think that, to me, the culture aspect of what it's like to work at a place where there's kind of Patrick Lencioni's ideas of
Yes.
conflict. You know how to talk to each other. You kind of get to the bottom of things, but you also treat each other with respect. I believe that that's the kind of culture you would see, and you'd see in the long run, decades and decades run businesses that they're going to be profitable sustainably, rather than maybe have a good 3 or 4 year run and then go bankrupt because some poor management or something.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're it's music to my ears to hear you speak like this, because we can do more than the minimum that the culture or the law requires us to do as Catholic business owners.
Certainly.
We can do more, and we can move towards, the old Catholic concept of the just wage. We can move towards that. We don't necessarily have to be able to go 100% of the way, but we can go a few percentage points along the way and still run a successful business and have margin and profitability, and build the necessities for our own families, and then do good works with our newfound wealth at the end of it all when we exit, and we all have a 10x return on our investments, and we can do great charitable acts. So tell me about, Silas, as you look at the world around you. What advice would you have, for, let's say, somebody who wants to start a business, a Catholic person, or somebody who's an employee of a company and maybe considering leaving the corporate world? what advice would you have for the kind of working person that works out there, but who wants to be more Catholic in their employment or their employer status?
So I would say, broadly speaking, if it's about trying to implement Catholicism into your work, whether it's your own business or where you work, most likely the most important thing you can do is first implement in your calendar a rigorous prayer schedule, because the only way you'll ever know whether or not you're meant to go start a business or to do something differently inside of your business or how you deal with your employees is the only way you're going to know that is through understanding what God's calling you to do. And you cannot do that if you are first focused on you. You need to be focused on what is God speaking to me. And if you don't develop the muscle of listening and kind of feeling, some people don't like this word, but feeling the vibes of what's going on, you're not going to know when God is tugging at your heart. For my example was I moved back to Wisconsin after 4 years in New York shortly after getting married. And I didn't really want to move back here, but I just kind of felt like it was the right thing. About a month after I moved back, a couple things changed with my job at the time, and it became very clear that now was the time to start my business. If I hadn't answered that kind of tug, even though it felt right, but I didn't know why, I would not have had the opportunity to start my business because life is very expensive in New York. So that's the first thing, is develop a rigorous prayer schedule so you can understand where in my work am I meant to be a witness in some way, or when am I supposed to do something? Because none of it will come unless you first know how to listen. That's my first point. And I think secondly, what kind of follows from that is, if you want to evangelize, most of the time you're not going to be going out and proactively evangelizing. It's usually when people come to you. If they come to you, they're coming to you with an inquisitive mind and they're open to hearing something. Those are the times when the Holy Spirit will talk through you and really help you to make an impact. It's happened for me several times with people around me, and it's not due to me. It's because the Holy Spirit speaks, but it's only they only listen. People only listen because they're interested in learning. So those are kind of the two core things that I think will make a really, really big impact on an individual scale.
Yeah, very interesting. I like that you said that. The question of let's move for a moment to let's say a young person, I don't know, a teenager, a young adult contemplating their future. They might go to college, they might not, they might have a professional trade or some other feature. They might be in a family business, but they want to start a business and they look around and they say, wow, this is tough. It's expensive. Where do I get the capital? What do I do? What market? What product? What do you say to a younger person trying to look for his or her life goal? We all have that spiritual calling that you spoke about earlier to me, and there's this earthly calling. But what would advice would you give somebody like that contemplating the future?
So I think there's two. Well, let's start with one. So the first thing would be find a mentor, in my opinion. If it weren't for a mentor in my life, I would have never become, somebody who evangelizes and do these things. I really did not have high hopes for what I could be. I thought, at the maximum, I might be able to, be a house builder. And while that's a great thing, I think it's also limiting belief, because I believe I have a lot of skills that God gave me, and now I'm trying my best to maximize those for his work. So first thing is find a mentor in something in business. So you're going to look around, you'll have an uncle, perhaps your father, perhaps somebody, in your church. There's going to be somebody around. You just have to be willing to look, find a mentor and ask them questions. Just get to know about business, because when you start, there are so many things you do not know, right? I love when
Yes.
people have an entrepreneurial spirit, but their first ideas, just like all of us, their first ideas for starting a business are really bad.
Yeah.
Everybody starts out with these kind of schemes and they don't quite get how things work, but that's okay, right? That's where we all begin. But you need to realize, be humble enough to realize that you do not know a lot. So approach, kind of tread with caution and ask for advice. That's the first thing, is mentorship. The second thing I would say is, once you've understood that your purpose in life is to know, love, and serve God, right? That's the first purpose all of us have.
Yes.
After that, you have a vocation. If you do not feel called to the religious life, then most likely you're called to the married life, right? That's kind of how my discernment went early on.
Yes.
And from there, hey, I've got to, one of the key things I got to do is provide. So either, I've got somebody I'm about to marry soon, somebody in mind, or I'm going to go build a business and focus on that first. And then understand what tendencies you have. I think as entrepreneurs, it's very easy to be like, I want to go, do a moonshot and change the world. But for me, when I was starting my first business, that, what I spend most of my time to pay the bills with, is I want to do something interesting, but at the same time, I was like, well, those other things are relatively risky. I don't know the outcomes. Whereas I've been doing recruitment for 4 years, and I can almost guarantee that I'm going to succeed because it's, I know how to do it. I've been doing this for 4 years. So think about things that you've done or that you already know how to do and use those as guiding principles. Because unless, some kind of several signs show up telling you to do something, most likely it's actually a relatively quote unquote boring path to what you're supposed to do. But that's okay, because this isn't about glory. It's not about your kind of, how your reputation is per se. Obviously you want to build a good reputation, but this is not about you. This is about you providing for your family and doing God's work. So those are the two things: is find a mentor and then understand what is my specific calling. One thing I try to often think about every morning is, why was I born into this time in history rather than, 1,000 years earlier or later? And just use that mentality of why, and you should eventually find the answer, but be patient because God sometimes takes his time.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm chuckling a little bit about what you said about a mentor. I really appreciate that, and I had great mentors, including my father and my grandfather. But I know I do some work with accelerators now, and I find that a lot of people, they come with a startup idea, and it's like, instead of answering the question of what is the business problem you're solving with your cool new product, rather they're more like a technology in search of a market, and so it's kind of a,
Yes.
I was chuckling away because that's a thing, that's an important consideration, isn't it? So let's, as we kind of bring it to a close, I've got a couple of last questions for you. One is, I'll try to put you on the spot a little bit. What's the number one success factor that every entrepreneur, young or middle or older, should consider, in your opinion, to make it successfully, as a Catholic business owner? What's the number one factor? Or maybe if you want to put it in the negative, what's the number one flaw that we have to overcome?
So this is a tough one. I didn't necessarily prepare to answer this, but I would say the number one thing to succeeding as a Catholic business owner would be understanding that you are the paintbrush and God is the artist. Okay.
Yeah.
Your business venture may not succeed. And that might be also okay, because God doesn't always give us rosy, things, not rosy
Yeah.
and positive outcomes. But those negative outcomes often teach us or prepare us for something harder in the future. So if you're going to succeed, there's a chance you can succeed without God. Many people do, at least for a time, but put yourself kind of in that vessel mentality that I am here as a in service to God. God gave me skills. These skills aren't just for me, right? He didn't just give me these so I can enjoy my life. He gave me these so that I can be an instrument of his will in acting upon other people. So that's the first one. The thing I would say to, the opposite of that, the negative to avoid, would be, don't try to force it. I had this discussion with somebody once around doing God's work for him rather than with him. So kind of trying to force it and go say, hey, this is my thing. I'm doing this for God. It's the right thing. But in reality, we're there's a lot of pride behind that, right? There's a lot of, this is me. This is me doing God's work. I'm righteous for this. So you have to learn to resign to the things that you can't control, but always pray. I forget the exact quote, but it said something like, pray as if it fully depends on God and work as if it fully depends on you. I think I forget which saint said that. And I've been thinking about that a bit lately. And I think that's kind of the mentality you should go, is work hard, but know that the outcome may not be as you view it, but do your best and pray that God will help you.
Yeah, that's, you've given excellent advice, I think, and I can only, throughout our whole conversation today, you've been talking about really humbling yourself and being humble and understanding that you're but an instrument, but through that instrument we can do great things, and people can do it through a business. So that's great. So let's close by asking you then, Silas, where do we find you? What's what's your websites, and what are your offerings, and where can we find you and what's coming up soon?
Yeah, I would say thank you first of all for having me on the show. It's been a real pleasure to be here. The best way to support what I'm working on is just go to catholicfounders.com and follow our Substack, join our community. We're going to continue growing that. And then I love to work with people on LinkedIn. That's where I'm found most. It's Silas, Silas Mahner on LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, I'm mostly a climate tech recruiter. So that's what I talk about there. And then the Catholic Founders thing is usually slightly more under the radar. But yeah, just follow along. And I would also ask that you please pray for my family and pray for St. Joseph intercession to help my dad to get some more work because things have been a little bit slow lately up at his shop. So those would be the core asks I have.
That's great. We'll definitely add that. And, Jim will put into the show notes all this information. And we'll ask everybody to say prayers, especially for your dad, too, because this is important times for all of us to keep going and to make it. So God bless you, Silas. It's really great talking with you. And I hope we can see you again sometime. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. It's a pleasure.